Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to start the second working day of our meeting. And as you know from the program, today we are converting science into advice. We have quite a tight program, except some small free time before coffee break. So my suggestion is that we will postpone longer questions and discussions to this 20 minutes. But of course, depending on the schedule, after every talk we can have a short question or two. So, and now we can start our program. I have pleasure to invite Maive Ruute from European Commission to give a talk, Evidence for Policy 2.0. Please.
Good morning. What a pleasure to see that you have indeed got up early in the morning to be here for this talk. And I have the pleasure to lead in the discussions of today. And some of you who were here, I think most of you were here yesterday, I took the courageous step to be actually in front of you and use the free microphone. But today I'm a bit handicapped because we have here the slides as well, which need to be changed. So I will speak from here, or at least mostly from here. But let me then introduce indeed my talk today. Let me see if my slides get that as well. Yes, indeed. So Science for Policy 2.0. And as you can see, I come from the European Commission's Science and Knowledge Service, the Joint Research Centre. And perhaps in order to put my talk into a context, let me perhaps say just a couple of figures about the service where I work currently. And maybe we start with the number of researchers, so the number of staff employed in the Joint Research Centre. I was quite intrigued to see the recent article in Nature about the Estonian research progress. And I think most of you probably have seen the recent article in Nature as well. So the figure that particularly triggered my attention in the Nature article was the number of researchers in Estonia, which is apparently around 3,000 people. So the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission has also around 3,000 staff. Although not all of them are directly researchers, of course we have also science administrators, people like myself, and we have, of course, also technicians working in our laboratories. But nevertheless, I think it's an interesting context to think of the Commission Science and Knowledge Service as a broad service indeed, covering a very large scale of research activities with something like 3,000 people working. And the breadth of our work is really very broad, spanning from from nuclear research to various, of course, modeling and things I'm going to cover today. We are spread in 5 countries. We have 42 large-scale research infrastructures, and large-scale meaning from nuclear research reactors to accelerators, and then about 30 laboratories, nanobio, and all kinds of others. And about 200 models, databases, and so on and so forth. And I work as a Deputy Director General, and my particular field of responsibility is in the areas of future of mobility, future of energy union, nuclear research, decommissioning of our nuclear facilities, and then, of course, the whole development of our sites, development of our campuses, and promoting living labs, promoting collaboration with industry, so things like that. Now, to the topic of today, Science 2.0. So what are the points I would like to discuss with you today? Well, let's first maybe link to what we discussed yesterday. We are living at complex times, and the problems or the policy issues that the governments and European Commission have to solve are not single, straightforward issues. They tend to be complex, they are often intertwined, and it's not so easy to find a solution that would not affect some other policy fields. So normally, whatever way you want to go to unpick the complexity, one would need to have very well informed basis for decision making. And of course, science for policy is the way forward. So what we do, of course, is that we keep an eye on the broad landscape, like certainly also here in Estonia and in Latvia and Lithuania, the governments try to be informed about the trends in the background, so the mega trends as we call them. And here you see the mega trends that the Commission Science Service, so JRC, is keeping an eye on. And on all these mega trends, we are producing regular updates, which then feed into the Commission policy cycle. And you can easily see here that when we talk about demographic imbalances, it certainly will have also links to migration. Migration has links to climate change. So many of these megatrends which we observe, of course, are interlinked as well, and they will have their implications then for the policy development in the Commission and in the Member States. And we also, of course, observe that the pace of change is going up, and there is kind of an acceleration in the background of these trends developing. And besides of the policy situation getting more complex, I think the audience here doesn't need to be reminded that in the science front as well, there are important issues which are currently debated or which are impacting the way how science is able to provide support and evidence for policy making. So let me just pick on each of these pictures very quickly without going much into it. Well, the first one, of course, is presenting the situation that we have currently such a flood of data and information coming. There is really an explosion also in the scientific publications. Some people even compare it with that if you want to try to get something out of internet, it is similar as if trying to get a drink from the fire hydrant. So you get completely splashed. Comes in such huge quantities. Another issue that we face is the situation that science itself is still compartmentalized, meaning that it's in these different boxes still. And although we are very much working on this transversality, linking up different disciplines, we are still not there. We can't still say that we have solved the issue. I think there is still a tendency to keep these boxes quite separated. So one of the challenges we see within JRC is the need to really work across different disciplines to address the complexity of the policy challenges. So that is definitely for us an issue. The third picture there with the question marks is the inherent nature of science, where science is looking for, or is working in the field of probabilities and is working with various risks, whereas the policy world, of course, would rather want everything to be black and white and have a very certain way forward. So this issue of also being in this kind of a tension field where we are dealing with various probabilities and risks is something that is not making the science advice much easier. Furthermore, we also see that in the science field itself there are big questions being debated about science perhaps being skewed, the incentives perhaps not being really the best ones for promoting science advice to policy, or promoting further maybe knowledge transfer towards industries. And we all know this debate about scientific careers depending a lot on publications and citations. So within JRC, we, for example, have 3 things we are observing. It's not only the publications. We certainly do monitor our publications and citations. But besides of that, we also count and monitor the policy impacts. So we literally go and check whether our recommendations, our data have been taken up by Commission policy services or by member states. So we literally count these occasions. And we have also a key performance indicator in the field of technology and knowledge transfer. We, for example, monitor how many patents have been generated from JRC work. So we try to really span on other fields as well beyond the scientific publications. And here, of course, the debate around science being biased or not biased is also something that adds to the complexity. The next little picture there is about the misinformation or the facts that are not necessarily facts. And this phenomenon itself is not new. Of course, if we think also decades back, we have had situations where the politicians were perhaps presenting facts in certain, let's say, certain way or with certain source. But what is causing the worries today is the situation that this tendency has received such a boost by the digital media that all these, let's say, half-truths or sometimes even fake news get really disseminated to such extent that they are undermining our democratic processes. And finally, what is maybe really one of the main points of my talk today is the final one with the little different elements of the puzzle coming together. Namely, we are more and more now seeing that the facts do not change people's minds. And we have seen it now more and more that we can come with facts, the best evidence, and people just keep to their own convictions and do not change their minds based on facts. And this is something that I would like to perhaps put forward today as a matter of discussion and debate. And I'll come back to these things through my other slides. And of course, what we have, of course, also to realize is that the science and policy have different mindsets. Scientists are exploring the world. The aim is to know the world, to understand the world. It's about investigation. It's about putting questions. It's about discovery and experimentation. While on the policy side, one is expected to act. One is expected to follow the mandate given by people who have given their votes to the person. It's about managing the world. It's about dialogue and justification of actions. So there is clearly a strong difference in the goals and also different norms and language because of these different aims that scientists and policymakers are facing. So just a little anecdote here. This is a picture about a man in a hot air balloon flying around, getting lost in the clouds, and he just can't see anything. And then finally there is a break in the clouds, and he sees there is a man on top of the mountain there. The guy in the hot air balloon descends further down to ask for directions from the man on the rock. And he descends and he hovers over this other guy and asks, where am I? And the man on the ground shouts back, you are at 45 degrees, 25 minutes, 29 seconds north, and 75 degrees, 42 minutes, 20 seconds west. I am standing at 100 meters above sea level, so you must be at about 120 meters. And the man in the balloon replies, you must be a scientist. I ask you a simple question, and you give me too much information, and I'm still lost. And the man on the ground calls back to the man on the balloon and says, you must be a policymaker. You came out of nowhere. You ask a lot of questions. I give you the most accurate and precise answer I can. You are still lost and you blame me. So indeed, we have a mismatch of expectations and we have an issue about the language. And then, of course, I think this is a picture many of you have seen, or let's say similar picture many of you have seen many times. So we talk about providing this bridge or building the bridge between science and policy. And we are now coming to a realization that maybe this is not fully correct, or maybe this is even a bit inaccurate, and maybe it's not sufficient. And that is why we call it Evidence for Policy 1.0, because we are coming to a realization that this a bit, I would say, linear logic that kind of subconsciously assumes that the policymakers do not have sufficient information, and there is kind of a deficit model, that science will provide something that the policy end is missing. And we come with this kind of advice, and they get it, and everything is going to go in a neat kind of a circle in decision making. But we are now more and more realizing that we need to take the further elements also into account. We need to take into account the expectation then the relationship with society at large, with various stakeholders, the interplay with policy making, and we also need to take into account the human biases and the perceptions that are getting on the way of decision making. We need also new tools and new skills and new methodologies to really get our scientific evidence across. Otherwise, it basically falls in the bit in between. And on these following slides, I'm going to explore a bit what we are in the Joint Research Center currently kind of trying to do about it, and what our findings and the most recent thinking is about it. Well, you saw yesterday as well, I think it was Christian Vassil who showed a similar round of the policy-making cycle. And of course, the point here is that it's a concept, but it's really only a concept. In reality, the decision-making is much more complex and much more back and forth between various political forces. So within the policy cycle, there are several feedback loops, and at almost every stage of this decision-making, some further stakeholders might come and do come with their scientific evidence and their data. So the role of the policy support service such as us is really to support the whole circle and not only come, let's say, in the early stage of policy formation, or not only at the end of the situation where things are already decided. So we need to be there and working really very closely with the whole decision-making and preparation and later implementation circle. So being available and being ready to act when the questions arise where, let's say, new contradictory evidence is put forward. That went a bit too fast. So this is, I think, a point I want to make, that it is not sufficient if we only feed our input in the early stage. Let's say we create, like last year, at the end of last year, we created a report on artificial intelligence. Very timely topic, something that Commission is working on, but it is not enough if it just remains a report which we have produced. Now, as the Commission services start working on it, we have to be there available for further questions that certainly will arrive as they start developing applications or certain policy areas where the AI would be utilized. Now, this is one of the slides I really like about my today's talk. This is a quote. I don't know if you can read it really. You should read the quote underneath. It is namely from economists supporting President Trump. And the economist says following: "This is the president's vision," said Peter Navarro, Trump's ascendant trade advisor. My function, really, as an economist, is to try to provide the underlying analytics to confirm President's intuition. And his intuition is always right in these matters. So, in a situation like that, where we are turning around the logic that we first look for facts and then we draw conclusions and base our policy on this, if we start now the other way around, that we first have guts feeling and then we try to look for facts which actually match it, it's not a very scientific or evidence-based way forward. But it is very clear that these biases play beyond the United States as well. So it's here as maybe an extreme illustration, but we certainly have it everywhere else as well. This one slide is about these perceptions, which I think very much play in the policy making in the European Commission and member states as well. This is a finding that we have from last year's work done on fairness in our societies, fairness and inequality. And why I put it here is just to illustrate that, again, facts don't always speak for themselves, and the perceptions of facts is something that very much matters to people. So what we see here is that we went through the actual inequality in our societies in Europe, and then we compared it to the perception of inequality in our societies. And if you read it now, then on the horizontal axis, you have the inequality. So the more to the right, the more unequal or less maybe fair these societies are. And the higher you go, the more the perception people have, the higher the perception of inequality. And what you of course see here is that countries such as US are quite unequal in their incomes distribution, but people don't necessarily perceive it as so unequal. Their perception of fairness and inequality is very comparable to Norway, for example. Now, on the other hand, you have countries such as Hungary and Slovenia, I believe here, or Slovakia, who are actually much less unequal. So they are actually they have much more fairly distributed income in these societies, but people perceive it as being fairly unequal, and their perception about the situation in their countries tells a different story. So this is just an illustration of one of these situations where if policymakers need to act on something like inequality of incomes or fairness in their societies, if they only rely on the facts, that may not be sufficient. They have to be also aware how people perceive these facts. So we are indeed now exploring then how do we get from the evidence for policy 1.0 towards evidence for policy 2.0, and maybe a few elements which we believe are kind of emerging into these new solutions or new ways of doing things. And I do not claim that we know it all. We just are really exploring how it could function better. So one of the things that Commission is helping us with is a very strong push towards better regulation. And this better regulation here really means that there is a much stronger push for having impact evaluations and impact assessments. So prior putting forward a policy proposal, there has to be already assessment what this policy would bring. And of course, once it's implemented, there will be also a follow-up. And I think this culture of really trying to measure and be vigilant that we are not pushing forward regulations or policies which are ineffective or which will go contrary to what they're supposed to deliver is, I think, a very important change in the Commission policy making. This is something we are now already engaged, I would say, in a few years, not only now, but already, I think, 5 or 6 years we are much more engaged in this. And it's also linked to, I think, reinforced audit culture, that the audits that Commission is putting forward, I know are not always the favorite subject of our recipients of the funds. However, for the broader range of Commission policies, the important point is that we scrutinize much more how the money is spent and whether our policies are effective or not. So better regulation should be seen also from the angle of actually cutting regulation, not necessarily building more of it, but to be clear that it is about efficiency and impact of the policies. So, and into this comes also the science advice and evidence we provide, where we are also involved in the improvement of consultation of public. So public consultation is something I'm going to show also in one of the later slides. Commission has a large number, about 700 or so consultations per year, and we are trying to make this process better so that we could be, as a policymaker, much better informed about what the perceptions are and what people's expectations are and what are the stakeholders telling us about the policies. Now about still the science advice, so getting from the data, getting from this abundance of new evidence into something that can be used, so finding this one thread to follow, which the policymakers need, is quite a work. That is also why the Joint Research Center is not only science service, we are very much knowledge service as well. So our task is to take this complexity of evidence and really work out what is the thread that one can follow from all of it, to make sense of the data, synthesize, and also I would need to underline the need to find consensus. I know that yesterday, again, there was a bit of a debate around climate change, for example. I think it's one of these classical examples where we have, of course, scientists who are not agreeing that climate change takes effect, or they are not agreeing that there is any human cause to it, but I would say the lion's share of scientists have a consensus that indeed climate is changing, and there is very much anthropogenic reason for it as well. So what we try to then do is to find consensus also on these more maybe complex or contradictory matters, and you know it well, there's not only one, there are many which are debated from GMOs to nuclear energy and so on and so forth. So this is also one of our tasks, to try to bring the consensus around and to present the views in right format, right time, to the right people. And for that, of course, we need to build certain competencies also for our own scientists. Or our own scientists need to build their competencies. And what you see on this slide is a new framework of competence and skills, we can say, for our scientists, so that they would be well equipped to do this type of knowledge work. And these different leaves of this flower cover various aspects of skills needed for supporting policies. And it is not only kind of a theoretical framework. Our plan is, in fact, to take this framework and over the next 3 years train about half of our, let's say, our key scientists. So we are aiming at training about 800 of our key scientists exactly on these skills, so that they can be better prepared for working with policy side of the Commission. And as you can imagine, it goes about really skills, tools, how to master new technologies. It's really, it is a retraining on some, to a certain extent. And we are also providing summer schools on these matters. And in fact, I think there are 1 or 2 people even here in our audience today who have attended our summer schools, where we, for example, train such skills in the fields of policy making in migration, or policy making, particularly for African leaders. We have summer schools on policies around water, energy, and food nexus. So we are training our own scientists, but also beyond that, we provide it to member states and even to the African leaders. The other side of the coin, of course, is that the policymakers need to be trained and ready to receive the scientific advice. So what you see on this slide is our ongoing work, which we do together with OECD. And the OECD, as you know, is, well, as the economists normally call it, it's the rich countries club. But it is indeed the organization that deals with economic matters and societal matters. So here we are working closely with OECD to develop, again, a framework of skills which the policymakers need in order to really to create the policies on evidence-informed manner and not only based on their guts feeling. And here are the 6 elements we have currently kind of established as the areas where training is needed. And this is also going to be taken forward and not just staying as a theoretical framework. We are on the overall kind of a landscape, what should be the skills? We work with OECD and we hope that this is going to be created as a framework which OECD will propose or suggest to the member countries. So it's going to be hopefully picked up by a broader range of governments. But within the European Commission, we work very closely with our central services which are dealing with the governance of the Commission and the HR policies within the Commission. So again, if I think now back to the context of Estonia, for example, so what kind of parallel could one find? Perhaps in case of Estonia, this would mean that such skills training would go through the state chancellery, so Riigikantselei, which is providing competence training for the officials in the ministries. So this type of training should be then really picked up by either the Prime Minister office, state chancellery or ministries. And in our case, we indeed deal with the Central Commission governance structures. And we are also now reaching out to one European top management school. So there is a so-called Hertie School of Management in Berlin. And we are going to develop a curricula around these 6 areas so that really a proper training can be developed and offered through the Hertie School of Management. So maybe here in Estonia, I don't know whether the European business, what we have, Estonian Business School would be ready, or rather maybe not business school, maybe one of the universities would be ready to do something similar for the policymakers to have the skills that is needed for evidence-based policy. Within JRC still, what do you do for knowledge management? So we have created a certain structuring of our services for so-called vertical knowledge management. So what is here is an attempt to organize the knowledge which we have around certain topics which are important or which are essential for Commission policymaking and which are often very cross-cutting, so we need to bring different disciplines together. So on this slide, what you see are, for example, our so-called knowledge centers. And these are, currently we have 6 of them. We have on disaster risk management, we have on migration and demography, we have territorial policies, which is mostly around smart specialization policies, bioeconomy, then there is a center for food fraud and quality, and then also on food and nutrition security. And they are bringing together again scientists and also policymakers who are working on these fields. So it's a way of creating a community around it. And there is normally in our structure a unit, which is kind of the hosting unit of such a center, but there is beyond our own staff also then involvement of policy officers from the various services which are dealing with it. And sometimes we also bring actually experts from outside to work with us around these topics. Just an illustration from the Knowledge Center on Disaster Risk Management, where we use satellite data and we have emergency alert system which we feed on hurricanes coming up, fires, forest fires. So this type of floods, droughts, wildfires, disasters that can break. So we have a system of preventing them and early warning. And then also there is a community around who are improving these tools and information flow. Then we have also horizontal knowledge management. And this horizontal knowledge management, we call them competence centers. These are really more about tools and various methodologies. So you see here also our existing 6 competence centers, which are offering support and training and advice on tools such as composite indicators, scoreboards, microeconomic evaluation, text mining, analysis, modeling, foresight, technology transfer. So you can see that these are kind of more tool and methodology-based centers. And again, there is a unit in our organizational structure which is hosting it, but it goes far beyond that. And the illustration, for example, here is one community of modeling which we have. You can see the names of the models on this slide, which is comprising of something like 200 different models. So our competence center on modeling brings these modelers together, wherever these modelers are actually placed in our organization. We create a community of the practice. We ensure that the quality of the models would be more harmonious and more maybe systematically followed. We create a repository of data which is used. And we also, of course, create a gateway for the commission services if they need help for modeling or they want to test whether their existing model may be outsourced from somewhere else, whether this model is accurate and correct. We have a gateway to our brains, to our best modelers, without needing to physically move them somewhere together. So we have one unit which is a host, and then the rest are linked to it through this community practices, which is a virtual space plus all these databases around it. And another very important element here is this co-creation, co-production, interaction with policymakers, where we literally bring people together. So it's no longer this kind of client and customer model where we would be providing kind of ready-made report to our clients. It's much more really kind of working pairs relationship, that we work together and we acknowledge that our colleagues in the policy side also have very relevant expertise and very relevant input. So by this interactive dialogue, we formulate the research questions, and it's not only us then knowing what needs to be looked at, it's really together with the policy side that we create the hypothesis, what needs to be researched and in what way we want to approach it. And we involve the policymakers really very early on in the process. Just some illustrations how this actually functions. I mentioned to you that Commission has really a large number of public consultations for the policy work we do. And there are, I think, really something like 770 over the last, 2 or 3 years or so. So the services of the Commission have been wondering whether we really have a good way of reaching out to the people. Do we reach to the right people? Do we have a good way of handling the feedback? And they came to us to design a better kind of a pathway for this public consultation. And what you see on this slide is how we have worked with them. Together, kind of really in an interactive way, in seminars, in brainstormings, making it also visual, what came up in discussions, and then working together with them, this kind of a service design pathway was created, and it turned into kind of toolkit for the Commission services for consultation of the public. Another one here, as you see, is a way of working together in the policy laboratory. So it almost looks like playing with Lego, but playing with Lego, and it is a bit like that. So people are interactively putting elements together, debating, moving things around. So it's again visual, it's very interactive, and bringing really everybody on board, debating the policy issues that need to be solved. And because we are very visual human beings, it is actually helpful to have hands-on and bring everybody around the table. These are very collaborative as setups, and it's actually great fun. A further element which we bring in is behavioral science understanding. We have people on our pay list who have the training as behavioral economists. And we have run over 20 studies over the last 5 years. And of course, we take input also from outside to understand how people really react, what their biases and reactions are, and what is the decision-making process really. And here are just some examples of the work which we have done on this field, or how we bring this knowledge to Commission decision-making, for example, electrical appliances and so on, how to really then use the attitudes and behaviors in such a way that it would be effective. Here is a very interesting way of working again on foresight, and illustration of how foresight and prototyping can be brought together. This is an example where we worked on blockchain foresight. So we had a task together with the policy services to see how blockchain could be used for industry in Europe. So together with, again, experts from us and from the Commission services, we worked on different kind of exploratory scenarios for blockchain being used in the industry. And we came up with, I think, 9 industrial sectors where blockchain could be possibly used. And then based on this, about 5, let's say, policy prototypes were created. So now thinking of the 9 areas where possibly blockchain could be taken up, we developed 5 prototypes of policies where Commission could possibly act in the next few years. And I just mentioned to you, which came up were interoperability and integrity in manufacturing systems, putting artificial intelligence in healthcare, then blood chain, which would be assets for managing blood collection and so on. So again, I think a very concrete example of how the foresight and prototyping is not only something that stays on the paper, but is very much involved in the policies directly. And my final slide, or rather pre-final slide, is that we're also working on handbook on science and evidence, trying to put our current learnings into a book, which we publish this year, and we make it, of course, available for everybody who wants to read it, so that there will be support for others who want to also come with us as pioneers on this knowledge management for policy. And the final quote today is from Donald Tusk, who basically said that as long as first he said, we have to really invest into evidence-based policy, because this is the basis for democracy. Secondly, in order to keep the evidence-based policy, really the basis of democracy, we have to realize that it's not only facts, we have to bring people's beliefs and their values also on board, and keep in mind that the values normally are stronger than people's belief in facts. So this is something that we would like to now ensure that, yes, we go for evidence-based policy, and we also keep in mind and find ways of building the values into it. And if you are interested in following us up, join us either on LinkedIn, Facebook. You find us under EU Science Hub. And I also know that some people were even interested in possibly working for JRC. So we are recruiting, and we are also opening our laboratories for collaboration. So scientists can come and businesses can come and work in our laboratories. So on our web pages, all these calls are regularly uploaded. Thank you very much.
I think we have time for few questions, so I already see. Please, you.
Is it on? On my journey here, I've opened the flight journal, and there was an article by Estonian scientists, one scientist, criticizing the present understanding of the notion of progress, and arguing that as mankind has means to destroy all the life on Earth, now we should revise somehow the concept of science and what benefit it brings. So would you agree that the paradigm of science products and evidence for policy among them is shifting? Science is not so important in producing the things that we don't have, but it is becoming important in producing the means to get rid of the consequences or to manage the risks that we have with the our current situation on here, on this planet.
Thank you. I think you're asking a very fundamental and philosophical question at the same time. I am a big believer that the challenges which are ahead of us are tremendous. And I think the science and the technology development is the way of solving them. However, I also understand that we shouldn't be kind of naively believing that technology solves everything without taking due care of also bringing our societies on board. And this, I think, is maybe one element that we haven't been necessarily so good at doing. We have maybe pushed ahead a lot with technologies, and societal, let's say, expectations and values are not always coming along. And second element is, of course, you are referring to the concepts of end of growth and so on. There is actually very interesting work still going on looking how we measure growth and how we measure well-being. And there also within the Commission services, and we are involved as well, there are studies or, let's say, reflections on changing this GDP-based growth calculations and trying to find ways of measuring progress and well-being which would take into account environmental issues, human well-being, health-related issues. So there are concepts which are being worked on, but currently, of course, we are still very much bound to the GDP, which we still measure very much as a main indicator. But we are working definitely to go beyond that.
Thanks. There was one more, yeah?
When the current Commission took office, the science advice in the European Commission was reformed. The former chief scientific advisor was fired, and a new system was set up with the group of 7 chief scientific advisors that rely heavily in their work on national academies of science. Now, JRC is usually depicted in these organizational schemes a bit on the side of this main mechanism that runs from the Commission through the SAM to the National Academies of Science. So what is your evaluation of this new science advice mechanism compared to the old one, and how does the JRC position itself in this context?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a very pertinent question. I think whether who is aside and who is in probably depends on your perspective. And now the Joint Research Center is 60 years old, and we have been there since the times of Treaty of Rome. The mandate, however, has changed quite a lot, and today JRC is within the European Commission services. We are one of the Commission services. And we are, I would say, kind of a think tank also, now working very closely with the President's office. So our privilege is that we are within the Commission services, so we are kind of naturally linked to policy making. However, beyond that, what you're referring to, the work with the broader range of national academies is still valuable, and it gives additional, I would say, kind of validation to a lot of science-based work. The national academies are linked to the other branch of the Commission, the Directorate General responsible for research and innovation, so DG RTD, which is our sister or brother, whatever we should call, a separate Directorate General, and we work very closely with them. And if you look at the administration of the science advice mechanism, JRC people are also involved in the staff who are running it. We really want to make sure that there is a good coherence between these two mechanisms. So we are working very closely hand in hand.
Thank you very much. We will return to questions before coffee break, because now it's time. But before you leave, I have honor to hand over. Hello. So now we can move to our next speaker today morning, Nina Hophan, to talk about SAPEA and EASAC. Please.
Good morning, and thank you for this almost inadvertent introduction to my talk. I will speak to you today about science-based advice for policymakers at the European level, specifically about ESAC, SAM, and SAPEA. And I would like to end my talk with a couple of success stories, because I think we've heard a lot of concerns now, and they're not invalidated by the success stories, but I just wanted to bring in a little positive note, showing some advisory projects that have worked and that is very satisfying. But firstly, let me clear up all the acronyms. ESAC is the European Academy Science Advisory Council. It is the Council of the National Academy of Sciences of Europe, including Norway and Switzerland. SAPEA stands for Science Advice for Policy by the European Academies, and is an interdisciplinary consortium of the academy networks ALIA, bringing in largely a social sciences, humanities perspective, Academia Europaea, an academy with individual membership, and a very broad spectrum, ESAC, bringing in the largely natural sciences perspective, Eurocase, the network of engineering academies, and FEAM, the network of medical academies. And SAM, the scientific advice mechanism of the European Commission, which consists of the group of chief scientific advisors that was already mentioned, supported by the so-called SAM unit in DG RTD, and SAPEA. Now, first I want to speak about ESAC, which is a sort of platform. It provides a collective voice to the national academies of sciences, and is an important source of independent scientific advice for policymakers. So by not being part of any European institution, by being independent scientists at European academies, these scientists can be brought together to bring a truly independent perspective, pure scientific perspective to policy advice. And by having this membership of excellent scientists, the national science academies are in a really good position to deliver scientific advice and share this important task of providing science-based advice for policymakers. ESAC focuses on science for policy, so the use of scientific evidence to guide policy making, and provides reports and statements containing a detailed analysis of the scientific evidence and recommendations based on this evidence to policymakers. These reports are designed and written to be understood by policymakers, something that's come up repeatedly as a particularly important point. So they're not written for other scientists. And ESAC prepares these reports in an efficient and timely manner to really time their advice as well as possible with ongoing policy cycles and major events such as the EU Energy Week and similar. ESAC works in 3 core programs: energy, biosciences, and environment, of course collaborating between these core programs where necessary And I'm just providing a few of the reports that were published over the recent years to give you an idea of the scope of ESAC's work, including, for example, projects on decarbonization of transport, storage and electricity grids, management of spent nuclear fuel, climate change and health, homeopathic practices and products and their regulation, genome editing, very topical, extreme weather events, and forestry, which I know that in Estonia is a very hot topic, and that I will speak about specifically later. However, ESAC also goes beyond these core programs where needed, so a good example is our report on European space exploration, which falls completely outside these programs, so we are, to some extent, open in scope. In addition to these reports aimed at policymakers, ESAC also publishes in scientific journals such as Nature and The Lancet, and in journals and e-journals largely aimed at the scientific evidence. This serves to provide feedback to the scientific community to see what policy conclusions are being drawn based on their scientific work, and also to hopefully inspire and engage the scientific community to come into this world to help with advising policymakers. I know that you can't read this, but I wanted to quickly walk you through the actual process of developing our science-based advice in ESAC. So the first stage is the identification and scoping of projects. This is a collaborative effort between the scientific directors of the respective core program of ESAC, supported by a steering panel, ESAC's members, so the national academies, the wider expert community, and there is a feedback loop with the European Commission and Parliament to scope for policy appetites and needs. If a project has been scoped to a certain point and approved by the ESAC Council, consisting of representatives of all the national academies, such as Professor Sommer here, ESAC establishes a working group of scientists. These are nominated by the national academies, and we put together a working group that has a nice complementary set of expertise, good geographical representation, and where possible, decent gender balance. The working group then proceeds to write this report, and it is peer-reviewed by experts, again nominated by the National Academies of Sciences, by upwards of 7 peer reviewers. Once the report is finalized and approved by ESAC Council, it is launched publicly in Brussels, usually in the form of a panel discussion, including, where possible, members of parliament, usually several commission officials, some scientists from the working group, and interested stakeholders. And so in a sort of 2-hour event, this report is launched and then disseminated, very importantly, to the national academies that can then use this report to approach their national policymakers, their MEPs, their parliamentarians, and to any interested stakeholders. And then follows a long trail of engagement and informing. Sometimes this trail extends over several years and often takes the form of individual consultations between working group members and specific groups in the Commission or the Parliament who are really interested in working with this report. And at the very end, there is review and evaluation within ESAC for any lessons learned. And this same process in a somewhat bigger version also happens in projects up here. So this is the sort of general pattern of developing these reports. Now, when thinking about where scientific advice can feed into EU policy making, one should consider the EU institutional triangle consisting of the European Commission, the Council of the European Union, and the European Parliament. Of these, the European Commission is the only body that can propose and draft legislative proposals, which are then co-decided upon by the Council of the European Union and the European Parliament. ESAC's primary focus is the European Commission, which is sort of the closest thing to a government that the EU has, and it is the EU's principal executive body. In addition to having the right for legislative proposals, the EU can also, the Commission can also initiate general policy packages, and it is in charge of overseeing the implementation of EU policies in the member states. We already heard plenty about the JRC, with which ESAC also gladly and keenly collaborates, and the new scientific advice mechanism, about which I will speak in a moment. ESAC's secondary focus is the Parliament, which has risen quite considerably in power in the EU over the last couple of years. To some extent, the Parliament is not the ideal target for advice from ESAC because it works at very different timescales. Decisions are often made at relatively short timeframes within Parliament, and ESAC takes, on average, just a bit over a year to develop a report based on a thorough consideration of the scientific evidence. But these parliamentarians are really important agents in Brussels because they really connect the policy discussions between the member states and the EU. And so by influencing the Parliament from ESAC's side and through the member academies influencing the actual parliamentarians, there are some wonderful synergies that can come together. The Parliament also has its own in-house research committee, the Science and Technology Options Assessment Panel, STOA, and a newly developed European Parliamentary Research Service, with which ESAC also collaborates. As I said, ESAC largely focuses on the European Commission in providing its advice, but also aims at the European Parliament wherever possible. The Council of Ministers is a typical target for national science advice systems, and the national member academies play a very important role here. In addition, very important synergies arise when the member academies also proffer the science advice produced through ESAC to their parliament, through their MEPs and their commissioners. The European academies are really special institutions. They're in a very good position to use their broad base of scientific excellence to offer scientific advice, to do it ideally jointly through a platform like ESAC to gain additional power. And in Brussels, there is a very direct and relevant and very interested audience, so it is actually a very gratifying interaction. And it is very important to really aim at the sort of Brussels level. About 80% of national legislation actually stems directly or indirectly from the EU level. So by coming in at the Brussels level, the European science academies and ESAC have a very direct and very efficient way of accessing the system. I mentioned the special effect of the united voice of the member academies, which are otherwise scattered and also limited in their resources. ESAC provides a platform to pool these resources and to have a very efficient process of offering the science advice. And ESAC has really invested in developing close connections with the European Commission and the Parliament over the last couple of years. Now, the scientific advice mechanism that was already kindly introduced has replaced the group of chief scientific advisors has replaced the previous sort of UK-based model of a single scientific advisor. The prime audience of advice in this new system is the College of Commissioners, not the individual ministries or the head of the Commission. Out of this college, the responsible commissioner is the Commissioner for Research, Science and Innovation, Carlos Moedas. And this group of chief scientific advisors is supported by the SAM unit. The key scientific advice comes through the national national science academies through SAPEA, but in developing the evidence base, there's also inputs taken into account from the wider scientific community, existing specialized advisory bodies such as European Food Safety Authority, European Chemicals Authority, etc. And independent of that, the Commission also takes into account the perspective of stakeholders. And I want to go into a little bit more detail here how it works. In a typical sort of top-down approach where the Commission has a specific policy question, and I'll provide an example for that later, approaches the group of scientific advisors with a question, which then passes the question onto SAPEA with a request to produce a review of the scientific evidence. Within SAPEA, the individual networks work together to identify a group of experts that gets together and develops an evidence review report, which is then handed over to the group of chief scientific advisors. The group of chief scientific advisors then develops a scientific opinion which contains specific recommendations for policymakers, and this is handed back to the College of Commissioners and specifically the commissioner who has asked the question. What this diagram doesn't entirely show is that the mechanism has a sort of second way in which topics can be generated. Both the group of chief scientific advisors and CPEA are in a position to identify topics that are of scientific interest that they would like to bring to the attention of the European Commission, so both can make proposals to the Commission, and if there is a corresponding interest and need for this advice, then the scientific advice mechanism will go ahead and do this. And as a matter of fact, right now, CPEA and SAM are both working on 2 bottom-up topics, one from the GCSA, the group of chief scientific advisors, and one from CPEA. Since its inception in 2016, the scientific advice mechanism has produced 2 reports without CPEA, because CPEA was only up and running really at the very beginning of 2017. So the cybersecurity and agricultural biotechnology reports are sort of standalone productions. And once CPEA became operational, we established this pattern of evidence review reports on food from the oceans, plant protection products, carbon capture and utilization technologies, and the corresponding opinions in the row beneath with the recommendations for policymakers. So these publications always come in pairs. CPEA's latest publication is on the microplastics in nature and society. It was only published in January, and it was so recent that we don't even have printed copies yet, so I've given you the link if you want to find out whether you should worry about microplastics at this point. And as I indicated, CPEA is currently working on a CPEA topic, transforming the future of aging. So how can the EU policy community put policies into place to enable healthy aging and engaged and involved in active older age, but also the social and healthcare systems that can cope with the demographic change. And both Sam and CPEA are involved in a topic called Making Sense of Science under Conditions of Complexity and Uncertainty. So the same issue about uncertainty, how to convey scientific advice to policymakers and to the public, given the uncertainty that is always associated with science, is not only plaguing us and not only the JRC, but also the group of chief scientific advisors in CPEA. Both of these are going to be published in the first half of this year, and there are some new topics up in the air on food sustainability and possibly climate change and health. And I want to show you 3 good examples, very satisfying examples, where scientific advice has worked. The first one is of great relevance here in Estonia. It is about forestry. For this ESAC project, we had a working group of 19 experts from 14 European countries that worked for 2 years to put together a particularly interdisciplinary report on forestry, and considered specifically forests in the context of climate change, forests and biodiversity, the way forestry is reflected in and should be reflected in EU climate and energy policies, and the opportunities for optimizing forest management given that forests have to serve a multitude of different objectives. As all ESAC reports, this report contained science-based recommendations for policymakers at both EU and national level, and this report made a wonderful splash in the news. And what was really interesting here is that it was a very prolonged debate, both in the media, but also in policy circles and in public. And from these ongoing debates, from requests for clarification, from realizing that in some of the discussions there seemed to be, sort of misunderstandings, ESAC actually provided a follow-up commentary on specifically the use of forest bioenergy to produce energy and its effects on carbon neutrality. As an example here of the newspaper coverage, I can't show everything because it was hundreds of articles, but some examples from Euractiv, an online magazine that is widely read in the Brussels bubble, There was a strong welcome for this report and a very critical perspective on EU climate policies in light of these new discoveries. An example of newspaper headings and a critical perspective on what the Parliament is discussing, particularly with regards to forestry, the use of forest biomass for energy gains, carbon budgets, etc. What was really wonderful in this project is that it actually led to an invitation of our working group chair and the director of ESAC's energy program, Bill Gillett, to Parliament to present their results and to bring their science-based recommendations directly into Parliament. You can see on the right side that questions about this report also made it into UK Parliament. And only last week, that is now about 2 years after the report was published, our energy director was actually asked by the European Commission, by the Committee for Sustainable Finance, to provide feedback into that program. So there's this long tail of engagement, of discussions with policymakers that are really using this report. They've clearly read it, thought about it long and hard, and are using it in many different areas of the European Commission. So that's very satisfying. Another example is ESAC's project on ecosystem services, agriculture, and neonicotinoids. Some of you may not be familiar with neonicotinoid pesticides. They're a particularly nasty group of systemic pesticides. Systemic means that the entire plant becomes toxic. They're very widely used in agriculture, not only in Europe, but worldwide. And first restrictions were instituted in 2013 after almost 2 decades of observations that the bees were dying. You might remember the word colony collapse disorder. There was huge concerns. And scientific evidence was emerging that neonicotinoids are not really that good for bees, so they restricted them. But the agricultural community and the pesticides industry disputed these decisions. And so ESAC decided to conduct a review of the evidence and to really study the effects of these neonicotinoids. But very importantly, ESAC took a much wider focus on the approach to this question than just this narrow focus on honeybees. ESAC decided to look at all organisms providing ecosystem services that are critical to sustainable energy. And this is a sort of intuitively logical and very important approach given the way neonicotinoids are used. Most neonicotinoids are used in seed dressings, so in a prophylactic manner before the seeds even reach the field, they're coated in these pesticides, but only about 5% of the pesticide that is in the seed coating actually gets taken up into the plant. The rest goes into the soil and water, and so there's an obvious expectation that this doesn't only affect the bees, it also affects all other organisms in ecosystems. ESAC's results showed indeed that this widespread prophylactic use of neonicotinoids has severe negative consequences on non-target organisms, so all the non-pests of the agricultural crops, that all wild ecosystem service providers show major declines. This goes all the way up to birds. You may have heard that the populations of birds have gone back by 30% over the last couple of decades. This is a direct consequence of the fact that there's very few insects left in agricultural ecosystems. There is clear evidence for sublethal effects of neonicotinoids. These toxins have a very specific chemical mechanism which makes them toxic at any dose. So there is no safe dose to use in the fields of these neonicotinoids. And any measures that focus on the protection of honeybees is actually not sufficient to protect pollination services, which are very valuable in an agricultural context, and other ecosystem services. This is because bees form these huge colonies with thousands and tens of thousands of bees. And if a couple of them die, it doesn't really matter. But most insects live in very small groups and families or are individuals. So if they die, they're simply gone. And put it a bit pointedly is that by the time that you realize that you have a problem with the honeybees, all the other insects are already long dead. The report also brought to the attention to issues with existing legal frameworks. So firstly, the sublethal effects of neonicotinoids are not sufficiently addressed in the approval procedures for neonicotinoids. And this prophylactic use of putting toxins on the fields before the pests even have a chance of arriving there is in direct contravention to the EU Sustainable Pesticides Directive. And actually, unsurprisingly, this report also made a big splash in the news with well over 200 items, including the New York Times. But even more importantly, what the ESAC report did is it elevated the discussions from this narrow focus on honeybees that had been prevalent in all the scientific literature from up to then, to a general consideration of pollinators and other ecosystem service providers. And a very satisfying regulatory response followed suit. The restrictions from 2013 were, over the next couple of years, supported by additional scientific studies, including ESACs, and have finally resulted in completely bans of outdoor use of these 3 major neonicotinoids in Europe. Other countries worldwide are looking into this, are considering following suit, and additional neonicotinoids are currently under consideration whether they can really be used further outdoors. My last example is from the scientific advice mechanism, from the project Food from the Oceans, where Commissioner Vella approached the group of chief scientific advisors with a specific question: how can more food and biomass be obtained from the oceans in a way that does not deprive future generations of their benefits? The GCSA then asked SAPEA to provide an evidence review report, which a group of 18 scientists from 11 European countries did in only 10 months. So this was a very short time frame, at least in scientific terms, given that this was the requirement from a policy cycle. And based on this evidence review report, the group of chief scientific advisors produced several recommendations that are reflected in the proposal for the next European Marine and Fisheries Fund. They're cited in the European Parliament resolution for the competitive European aquaculture sector, and they're cited in the Marine Spatial Planning Strategy for Blue Growth. So this is a good example of how there was a very close loop. There was a specific questions, there was a group of scientists that was able to provide a science perspective, there was a group that was able to translate the science perspective into clear policy recommendations. It was handed back to the Commission, and it had a very near in terms of time effect on actual legislations. So I hope that these examples show that science advice can work. It doesn't always work, and I'm not saying it's a particularly efficient process, but there are numerous instances where scientists have, often through the help of specific platforms such as ESAC or SAPEA, been able to communicate the science-based recommendations for policymakers to EU institutions and actually had an impact on legislation. Thank you.
I suggest we will postpone questions and discussions to the end of this session. And before you leave, so now we have a third presentation of today by Tarmo Soomere about the blue future.
Sometimes the advice may kill you if you drop your advice from a too large height to the heads of parliament members. So be very careful when putting together your advice. And be even more careful if you are working in the area where the advice is bordering with lobbying. And this is exactly what the European Marine Board is doing. It is advising, at the same time it's making some lobby work. It's quite old body. It started in mid-90s, and then it was for a long time a panel of European Science Foundation, until this foundation was converted from a science supporting body to a consulting body. And then the Marine Board decided to form an independent legal body, and it's working now under Belgian law. So technically, the nice words is that the European Marine Board is an independent, a non-governmental advisory body with 2.5-fold target. The two first targets are absolutely clear. The name is telling that it's trying to advance marine research, and it's also trying to bridge the gap between science and policy. And the rest is very familiar to some in this audience. We all remember that in old Soviet times we were telling that the United States is on the edge of chasm, but we must be in front of them. It tries to bring together opinions, voices, ideas from 32 member organizations today from 18 European countries. I don't show the map of those countries, very simple, by very simple reason, because Finland and Latvia don't belong into this body, which means that the voice of Estonia is very strong. It is, in a way, a unique partnership. It contains 3 cohorts. The funding cohorts were major marine and oceanographic institutions of single countries and research funding agencies. And later on, also national networks of universities were included. So the uniqueness here is that we try to combine into one voice 3 things which are sometimes non-overlapping and sometimes even contradicting with each other. It's voice of science, voice of cash, and voice of education. It is a challenge, and it's not always possible to reach a unique voice around the plenary meetings of this organization. But its result is a good common platform of all those 3 components. Of course, it does have its nice words. What does it do? In terms of strategy, of course, it tries to identify the most important challenges, to provide some foresight activities, a glimpse into future, and to do that using high level and very heavy recommendations, up to 1.5 kilogram per recommendation. We try to be shorter now. I mean, I'm part of the Marine Board. In this sense, I can say also we. But it is important to somehow bring together the very different voices on water bodies, from the Baltic Sea, which is almost a lake, and up to Atlantic Ocean. So it does bring together the knowledge and positions from all seas surrounding Europe. And of course, it tries to create a common voice for a very simple reason. If scientists invite a policymaker and start to fight with each other in the presence of policymaker, the policymaker doesn't stay for dinner, and you can't talk to him or her. So we have to fight with each other first, and then go to policymakers to tell in what we have agreed. And in this sense, having a common or at least harmonized voice, a chorus doesn't use common voice. It has very different tunes, but it must be harmonized in order to really provide some realistic glimpse into the future. The artists have painted a very nice picture of what the Marine Board is doing. We think ourselves that this is the European think tank for marine science, and what we are trying to do is to transfer the best existing knowledge to the core of marine research policy. It is perhaps a bug, not a feature, that not many European academies contain experts in marine sciences. So marine science is in the landscape of science, but not so much in the radar of academies of science. And that's why the work of marine science is in a way complementary to what Teaduste is doing and providing science from a much wider background. Just to try to understand what are the forms of advice. Basically, it's the same as Teaduste doing, from position papers to shorter vision documents with a weight typically 200 grams and statements with a weight of 50 grams and 4 pages, and to conferences and fora, and sometimes to very targeted interventions when necessary. So the targets to work with is same as ESAC, plus now back to national policymakers. This is important from the viewpoint of European Marine Board, that the public and scientists in the countries from which advice comes also knows what advice is being supplied to the European Commission. So the quite large work today is being done towards general public. And of course, what we think we could impact is European research area, the joint programming initiative today, with which we are working very closely together. What is important, which is our lobbying, not advice, it's research investments. It is important to tell to the Commission where the bottlenecks are. They don't know themselves, we believe. Maybe they know, but they need some help. And of course, if there is some money to put into infrastructures, into better research, into research tools, then also Commission needs some advice. And in the widest sense, the European Marine Board thinks about the general seas and ocean management, which must be considerably improved because it almost doesn't exist today. In terms of particular advices between 500 grams and 1 kilogram, something is missing on the it's missing which time it was published. My Valuta told about decommissioning of nuclear power plants. Equally nasty thing are different offshore man-made installations which contain a lot of oil products, a lot of chemicals. We have to remove them at some instant from the sea. It is costly, it is not so easy, it's dangerous, and there are some scientific views on how it should be done. We are, of course, looking at standard things like biotechnology and other things in our reports, but we are trying to look things a bit more widely and to advance such thing as citizen science. The meaning of science has changed pretty much. Science doesn't have ultimate truth anymore. Science even doesn't say truth. Science just says the best organized information at the particular instant. And if we can involve the knowledge which is contained in people, starting from members of learned scientists and just fishermen who know much more about the fish stocks than we do, then we could be on the winner's side. So this sort of position paper was released last year, and also plus one policy brief. We are really concerned of how the next century marine professionals must be trained. Marine science, as many other things, and especially management of seas and oceans, needs not only interdisciplinary, it needs some transdisciplinary understanding of things. It is not being taught in any single university, so we do need some change in the attitude and paradigm in training of 21st century marine professionals. So this brief was just relatively recently produced and published. So how the things work are fairly similar to how ESAC works. The first stage is sort of gathering of ideas, 1 page, A4, like it must be submitted to policymakers. And those are discussed in the Executive Committee of Marine Board, which has 6 members. And we found timely, important, matching our mandate, and also what's not so minor thing is matching the resources of member organizations. We may have great ideas how to settle mankind on Mars, but it's not feasible to produce a recommendation within the member organizations of Marine Board, so we don't do that. Then the extended idea, 2 A4 papers, is discussed in a plenary meeting, and then we found attractive and reasonable terms of references will be written, a working chair group created, chair sort, etc., etc. The typical time scale of this sort of advice is 1 year. You can't expect faster reaction from science community and from also cash community. Also, in order to do some conclusions about whom to finance, people need time. And this is sort of problem which Christian Wassiel highlighted yesterday, expectations in terms of time scale. We have to harmonize them. We have to think differently about time. So then when putting together the terms of reference, then we always think about who might be the real target audience. If the target is too narrow, say only European Commission, it's not worthwhile of making the job. So it must have a wider reaction. It must touch somehow people who are working with sea or are working on the sea. And of course, it must have some feedback to research, basic research in the adjacent fields. Work groups are formed similarly like in the ESAC, as wide as possible, as gender balanced as possible. Normally, it's not balanced normally, not balanced equally the genders, but we try to do that. And of course, trying to put together extremely complementary competence, so that to cover basically the whole spectrum of views, even if controversial. We are not afraid of writing into our science briefs or recommendations the words that we don't have a consensus, there are different views, but we must advance in this or other field. Some ongoing work, and just trying to show how wide is the scope. Research vessels are the basic infrastructure for marine research. They are extremely costly. They are not as costly as CERN, but close to, in a way. And then we have to think about so different applications. You have to have some shallow water ships, you have to have some polar ships, you have to have open ocean going ships, you have to have drilling ships, etc., etc. So even management and coordination of the views on which kind of ships a single country or consortia of country must have is extremely complicated. So we redo this sort of analysis approximately once in 10 years, having in mind that the normal service time without major renovation for research ships is about 10 years. So this research group is working now. In the progress, a major thing is The main position paper of Marine Board Navigating the Future, this is the 1.5 kilogram thing, of which I have a couple here, but just I can't carry more. So this is a sort of overview which tries to put together the future and emerging research directions, things where we have to look more carefully or in more detailed manner, or vice versa in more generalized manner. So today what we're thinking of is how the science should look beyond 2030, how the ocean observation system must radically change. We can observe in extreme detail salinity and temperature, etc., but we can't observe biology. There is no real way of observing biology, and there is no real way of modeling modeling ecosystems. We think that the future of ocean is four-dimensional. 3D plus time, and it is a field where a lot of interests are conflicting and a lot of stressors which we really don't feel here on dry Earth, they are meeting each other. So we have to think about cumulative effects. We have to think about simple things like microplastic, which was mentioned by Nina. You can clean Earth's surface from plastic, but you can't clean the water column. And plastic is a source of energy. Evolution is showing that you always find a creature which can eat or consume this source of energy. I don't think we would like somebody who would consume plastic. They would eat first our planes, then our cars, then the screen, and then even our clothes. And we can't stop that process. So polluting ocean with microplastics and nanoplastic, it is much more, it creates a much wider set of problems what we should think of. European Marine Board also participates in several Horizon 2020 projects and is trying to lead specifically the foresight items. It organizes regularly its fora, which we think are important. We don't know whether they are really important for the rest of the world, but we have one strong argument always, actually two strong arguments always. You can measure the impact by the level of wish of high-level officers to visit your meetings. So the Marine Board plenary meetings are always visited by at least one European Commission officer, and Claudia Vella decided to meet approximately twice a year with selected people from this European Marine Board. So in a way, we think we are small but impactful, and the chair from Belgium is now surrounded by the 6 persons who are executing the impact, but we still have one more argument. For those who ignore good advice and important information about the seas and oceans, the result could be as such. So I think that it's probably a good idea to be well informed. Thank you.
I think we have time for one question. Yeah.
No. Better not.
Okay, we postpone to coffee break. Fine. Now we have a last. Yeah. Saloniki.
Thank you very much for your interesting talk. I don't have actually a question, I have a suggestion for you. Because I'm a scientist and I'm working with vegetables, but with a very good product called effective microorganisms. And in Asia, this product has been used for cleaning the seas, because it has a power to give beneficial microorganisms to the sea, and they are purifying the sea very well. So if you can it cannot be used in here as well as by the same methods as in Asia, because those are tropical countries. But I think it is first to develop the methods and for European countries also by this product.
Yeah, this was one of our recommendations, that the biotech must include also biological impact back to the ocean. Thank you.
So, thank you. I think you have everything we have here in back, so I will not...
I take the last bag.
Last one, okay. So, now we have a last talk of this morning session by Rein Vaikmäe, and this is about climate change, yeah? Please.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay. My talk will be a little bit actually connected with the previous one, because I'm going to talk about the European Polar Board, which also was established in middle 90s. And actually, when Estonia joined European Science Foundation in middle 90s, we in the same time also joined the European Polar Board. And just to show you what were the aims, it was also advisory body in a way, and it consisted of actually the members of Polar Board were national academies or institutes dealing with polar research, or in some countries ministries or institutes dedicated to polar research. In Estonia, the member is Estonian Academy of Sciences, and in few years ago, when European Science Foundation actually was reorganized, then we had the same problem as Marine Board, so we decided to have an independent body, and we are now our secretariat is now located in Hague, and we are acting by the Belgian law as Marine Board, but according to the Dutch law. But basically, the conditions are the same. And what is the vision of actually mandate? To connect actually the national policies and polar research in Europe, and to have a common European view. And this is, of course, as polar research is quite expensive, so there is more or less impossible that one country can actually do separately research. So research in polar areas is actually international all the time, and so we have to both the finances and actually human resources have to be, we try to join them, and also to join the ideas. And it's a major aim is just to coordinate and actually to we engage quite a lot of young people, and so this is we separately have actually formed a body for young early career scientists in Europe to attract them to the polar research. And of course, the major aim of this organization is also to give advice as to the European Commission, and also to the, of course, country's government. Promote, coordinate, and advance are the key words here. And few years ago, in 2014, European Commission actually turned to European Polar Board to get advice how to go on with European polar research strategy in both polar areas, because Europe is basically always more being interested in Arctic research and things which happen in Arctic, and this is quite logical. But if you look on the global change and climate problems, both polar areas actually are big players there. So Polar Board is the only organization in Europe looking on both polar sides in Arctic and Antarctic research as well, especially which is related to logistics, because this is actually one of the most expensive part of on this work on high latitudes. And there is implementation plan of the European Polar Board strategy, and here you see we have actually put together a catalogue of infrastructure both in Arctic and Antarctic, and there is European infrastructure in Arctic, which is actually basically polar stations, also vessels, as Tarmo mentioned, and in Antarctic there are stations which are permanent stations and actually accessible to all members of European countries. So the infrastructure is one of the most difficult part of the polar research to keep this infrastructure keep alive all around us the year. And as I mentioned, in 2014, European Commission asked European Polar Board to build up the strategy for maybe next 20 years for polar research in both areas. And therefore, it was organized a program under the Horizon 2020 and project EU PolarNet. Basically, it formed so that the Commission asked Polar Board to organize this project, and the countries who are participant in members of European Polar Board are also participant of this project, EU PolarNet. And the main aim is to build up to the 2020 strategy and action plan for polar research in Europe. And the leader of this project is Alfred Wegener Polar Research and Marine Institute in Germany, and all the countries members of European Polar Board are also members of this project. And we started in 2015, and basically the work is organized so that we have several groups dedicated to different questions, and twice per year we have general assemblies where we discussed what has been done and what will be the next steps. And we started for public discussions what are the most urgent questions in this area, and involved in this discussion not only scientists, but of course the wider public and so-called stakeholders. So in every year we have held also public discussion and presentations, and up to last year we were putting together white papers on which to build up this polar research strategy. And last September there was a meeting in Brussels which was organized by European Parliament Group of Environment and Sustainable Development, and where we presented our draft versions of those white papers. And there are not only the institutions in the countries represented in this project, but also different organizations active in polar research, like SCAR, which is active in Antarctic, and International Arctic Council. And it is not only Europe, but actually we have members also from Northern America and also from Asia. So it is quite broad based expertise in this project. And the main focus is also, of course, the keyword maybe is global climate change, but this is not only the climate, but also how is actually, if the climate is changing, how it influences people living in this area. So it means that very actively also the native people from polar areas, especially of course in Arctic, because in Antarctica it's a little bit easier. There are mainly scientists active, but not so much. Maybe penguins are not so much interested what we are doing here. But anyway, we also have to have a look also what will happen with global change with inhabitants. So, and we have actually published our first draft reports about those plans, and all those publications and reports are actually very widely discussed. We have had discussion and actually public opinion discussion through the internet, and I will soon show you also the results and how active different groups have been participating in this discussion. So we have actually through those years actually recognized most important topics for scientists, but totally what politicians should also take account in these conditions where the global climate is changing. And identification of different stakeholders and their needs is also very important, because we have seen that if this is also, basically, of course, as usually, scientists are most active, they are interested in this research. But to get, let's say, as we have discussed during this meeting, that this work also would influence really the policy, we need opinion of all the major stakeholders who are actually involved. And so this is an example of our internet questionnaire in early last year, which were actually, there were several questions for stakeholders, and we got quite a lot of answers. This was quite actively participated. Of course, participation by countries was rather different. It's quite understandable that the countries, let's say the Arctic countries are most active. But it's quite interesting that in Europe, let's say, countries which seem to be quite far from polar areas, like Portugal, Spain, Bulgaria, they have been very active in polar research, and also we got quite a lot of response from them. And also for policy people, and if you look by the countries, of course, I was not very happy what happened with Estonia, because there were very few responses to this questionnaire in Estonia, in spite that we actually distributed it quite widely here. So especially, there were quite a lot of response from the scientific community, but not for, let's say, policymakers or ministries or from industry from Estonia. And last year we then had this big meeting in Spain discussing our draft white papers, and recognized the major areas, the major question which will be put into this strategy on which we are now working, because those white papers were accepted by the public, and our presentation of white papers for European Parliament members last year was very actively attended, and got very good response. And one output of our work, when it will be ready in 2020, should be that Commission is planning for the next framework program research project for polar research. At least current Commission has planned to invest more financing resources on polar research during the next framework program. Of course, this year's Commission and Parliament will be changed. We don't know whether this new Commission will take over these ideas, but we are still optimistic in this way. And the final deliverable will be the European Polar Research Strategy and Action Plan, on which we are now working with different working groups, and it should be ready in 2020, and then we'll see how it will be taken. But for scientific community, I guess this is quite optimistic view that it seems that at least Commission takes it very seriously. This polar research is not important only for, let's say, for problems to solve problems and get answers for climate change, but it is much more, it has influence for many people, not only those who are living in polar areas, but wider, because the climate change actually is influencing widely, and everybody actually in the world will feel the results of these changes. And so I guess this is more or less time to finish. This is just what I think which has been important during this project, that usually such kind of strategies, like also when we built tried to build the Estonian strategy for polar research, this was based mainly on opinions and actually suggestions from scientists. But this is now the topic, actually document which has input from different stakeholders, especially very much from industry. And of course, this is quite understandable that the industry is very much interested in problem, especially in Arctic, because when it's nowadays, we know very, very well how Arctic is warming, and it will be influenced on economy, traffic, access to mineral resources, and it is very politically very sensitive topic. Now in Arctic, even men like Putin and Trump are interested in putting even organized trip a submarine to put the Russian flag under the North Pole, which is of course not very, let's say politically very correct, and people are not very happy about, but this shows how hot topic the research in this area and future will be. So I guess with this I will, and maybe one output from our work is also we have quite a lot of focus on infrastructure, which is very expensive, polar research stations, vessels, whatever, and we have actually now put together an interactive catalog of polar infrastructure, which is accessible to everybody, and you can look where is free spaces to do your research in polar station in different areas in Arctic and in Antarctica, or what and where are currently the research vessels, and if there are some free spaces to join. So this is very practical and very useful instrument and as a deliverable from our work. So with this, I guess I will finish, and I thank you for attention.
Thank you. As we have now coffee time, I suggest you can ask questions from Rein during the coffee break, because coffee is hot and we will have a new session.
And Rein is also hot.
11:20,
still.
please. Be back here.